Hey everybody, welcome back to creating scenery for Microsoft Flight Simulator using free resources. Today we are going to talk about projected meshes. I'm going to try to make this as short as possible. I'm not going to do any modeling, but I'm going to show you what I did. If you have any of the Blender skills to model, obviously you could do it yourself, and I know you can. All right, so let's get started. I have an airport. This is my 5 Alpha 1 in Norwalk, Ohio, that I use as my guinea pig, and this is Google Earth. This is Summit Raceway drag strip, which is another one of my sceneries. Just a fun scenery, but we are concentrating on the airport, which isn't much. It's just a simple strip. Some crop dusters fly out of there, you know, a couple business jets every once in a while, but not very often. It's old, raggedy. There are no real ground markings on the airport, but I'm using a specific area just to show you. Okay, so in the scene, you're going to see in the simulator this area right here, just this pavement right here. All right, and I did a measure of it, and I think it's something like 200 feet across by 150 or something like that. That's meters. I know some of you guys are metric, which is fine. 63 meters by 45 meters or so. It's about 200 feet by 150 feet. And now in the default sim, there's a tower sits right here. Okay, it doesn't exist. Okay, but I'm just going to show you what projected meshes are. All right, so this is the airport. The markings that I've made are not real, but it gives you an idea what you can do with projected meshes. So let's go into Blender, and in Blender, basically, you'll notice some lines. Whoops! You'll notice some modeling of some lines that I did. These would be typical of parking at gates at an airport. Obviously, this little airport's not going to have them, but they're nothing really fancy. Okay, they started out as planes. Actually, one started out as a plane, and then I just made 2 copies of it. All right, so if I go into edit mode, sorry, my mic fell down. So if I go into edit mode, first turn KeyCast on. It's not really going to need KeyCast all that much. Okay, but if we go into edit mode, like I said, tab in, you're going to just see that it's just a set of polygons that I've made this shape. Let me get into just shaded mode so you can see them without any materials. All right, and notice that, yeah, it's just a simple polygon with an inset that makes these outer boundaries here. And then I did some editing to get rid of the corner bevels. See how it bevels some of the corners? Well, it beveled these. I just moved them so they're in straight lines. All right. And then I applied some materials. Now, the thing that you need to know about projected meshes, at least what I found, it doesn't like Blender's native vertex colors. And if you remember, a vertex color is, if I went over here to materials, and if I did a new material, and then I just used the simple base color, well, let me do that here. Let's disassociate. Let's go into color here, and I'm just going to disassociate the yellow for now, and I'm going to add a new I'm not going to give it a real name, but I'm going to add a new material, and I'm going to make it a vertex color. Okay, a vertex color means you come down here to base color, and then you just basically choose out of the color wheel some kind of color. All right, you do not use the MSFS parameters. You're just using native colors in Blender to create your material. All right, you're not using a texture. You're not using a PNG or anything like that. You're just using native Blender colors. That's called a vertex color. Now, now I can disassociate this again and come back and choose my yellow. Now my yellow is an actual 4K color swatch that I created in Krita. It's just 4096 by 4096, and I made it the yellow that I wanted, painted it, saved it as a PNG, and then I went into UV editor and unwrapped the polygon and then mapped that particular texture to. All right, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it is a texture. All right, it's nothing fancy, it's just a yellow texture. What I found is that with projected meshes, it doesn't like the native vertex colors that you would get out of Blender. They come in white, all right, no matter what color you use. So I had to actually create a texture, even though it's just yellow, and then I UV unwrapped and then map that texture to the object. All right, so know that when you do a projected mesh. Now, the other thing about the projected mesh in this example is, remember, we have a 200 foot by 100 foot area, and if I turn this plane on, I'm going to get out of viewport shading here. All right, so this plane right here represents the parking area, that asphalt area, and all these are the parking lines and this rectangle. They're just planes. They don't have any dimension to them other than X and Y. Okay, it's not a model, but when you create your projected mesh as a Blender model, you save it just like you normally would. So to show you that, in my 5 Alpha 1 airport, in my package sources, in the model lib folder, you will see that I have one that I called ground mesh. Okay, I also have one called my apron. All right, so inside of these, okay, ground mesh actually has the Blender file that you just saw in Blender, and ground mesh is just the parking lines. That's all that's in that. See how tiny they are? They're really small when I exported them. Okay, but the export is no different than any other model. All right, the apron, I just have the bin, GLTF, and the XML because it's coming from ground mesh Blender file. I just exported just the apron out to this particular folder. So you do have to have a model in your airport or your scenery, okay, in the package sources, just like any other model. All right. Now, the export is exactly the same. All right. So if I turn off the plane, let me turn on the viewport shading here so you can see the textures that I used. All right. So I used an asphalt texture for the plane, and then I did my yellow and my black. Don't worry about this interference. Okay, this will get taken care of when you bring it into the simulator. All right, and the reason there's interference because there's two-dimensional polygons sitting on top of each other. In Blender, it probably look like crap, but once you bring it into the simulator, you can control the drawing order of the mesh. All right, so I've made two objects, two models for this projected mesh project. Okay, I created one for the lines and then one for the actual apron itself. All right, then I just used the normal export that we have been doing, the Asobo exporter, all that kind of stuff. No level of detail or anything like that. But I exported each one of these out to their model lib folders. All right, now we're going to go into the sim and show you how to add these as a projected mesh. Okay, we're in the sim. I'm at 5 Alpha 1 Airport, and my airplane is parked here. And if I zoom out here, this is that pavement area that we saw in the image. I have a lot of stuff turned off because of my boundary of my airport. I have buildings and stuff turned off. But notice that this tower still shows up. That's okay. Anyway, this tower doesn't really exist. All right. Now, it's time to add things to my airport, and I want to add those projected meshes. And notice, yeah, I've turned off my picture because it always freezes. All right, so if we open up the objects, you'll notice that there's the 5 Alpha 1 airport that I've built, and you build it just like any other project. After you create your two-dimensional, so to speak, object for your projected mesh, and you add it to your airport or your scenery, and you build as normal. Okay, then when you bring it into the sim, you should see your objects. Here's my apron, and here's ground mesh down here. Now, what you need to know about ground meshes, projected meshes. The first thing that I need to explain is I don't like the name projected mesh, but that's just because I'm a cartographer, and the real name of a projected mesh that Flight Simulator uses, it's really an image drape. It's like the three-dimensional ground. You're taking a sheet and you're just laying it on the ground. All right, it's an image drape is what it is. Okay, but I'm not going to mix terms. I'm going to keep it for what they say, so we're going to call it a projected mesh. There's no projection really going on. It's just draping an image onto a three-dimensional surface. Okay, so if I add, if I click my ground mesh, which is the parking lines, and I hit one click placing, notice that there are my lines. All right, now one of them is missing. Okay, but I'm not adding it. If you notice, look at the one that's right on the left side. See how it's kind of hovering above the ground? Because right now I'm adding it as a scenery object, which you can, all right? But that's not what we're trying to do. We want to create a projected mesh. So instead of adding it as a scenery object, let me uncheck one click placing and change scenery to projected mesh, and then click the ground mesh, make it independent projected mesh. I don't want it to be associated with an airport in this case. And then I'm going to do one click placing. Now notice that all three show up and they're actually on the ground. Now I think they're there. So if I click and then turn off one click placing, when I zoom into those lines, they are on the ground, okay? And they even have the ground merging going on to give you that rough look, all right? Now, let's go back and let's delete this for now. And let's go to object type and make this an apron. And let's just add in a default apron. Okay? So I'm going to hit my left control, click with my mouse, my left click mouse, and I'm just going to put an apron right here, hit enter to finish it. And it puts an apron on there. Okay? Everybody, you guys should know how to do this by now. But here's the thing. Now, let's go back into projected mesh, and let's choose our ground mesh, and one-click placing. You don't have to do one-click placing, but I'm going to do one-click placing, and notice how the projected mesh that we created in Blender is underneath the apron in the scenery editor. Now I'm going to click it, and then I'm going to get off of one-click placing, and I'm going to right-click and bring up the properties, and notice when I change the drawing priority, the higher this number, the higher the priority in drawing is. Okay, the apron comes in as a default of 0, and so does my projected mesh. But if I increase, now this is an Asobo apron. If I increase the priority, notice that my projected mesh still does not come above the apron. All right, so that's why I created an apron in Blender and using it as a projected mesh. All right, so let's get out of properties, and let's go ahead and delete our projected mesh, ground mesh, select our apron, and let's go ahead and delete this apron. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to projected mesh, and I'm going to choose my apron. I'm going to do a one-click placing. Okay, I'm going to kind of zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to move that apron that I have already scaled in Blender, and I'm going to drop it right there. Turn off one-click placing. Now I have my projected mesh for my apron. This is the my apron object that I created in Blender. Now I'm going to stay on projected mesh. I'm going to choose my ground mesh, one-click placing, and I'm going to drop those 3 lines right here. Okay, and then turn off one-click placing. Okay, now my lines are above my projected mesh for my apron, but I can right-click properties, and I can increase the priority, and the priority of the 2 projected meshes on top of each other will pay attention to each other. Okay, so if one is not showing up, increase its priority in order for it to show up on top of the other one. Now, like I said, these are projected meshes. These are draped images onto your scenery. So you can do your aprons, you can do all of your airport line drawing and safety areas and all that kind of stuff. You can do those in Blender and then use them as a projected mesh in the sim. All right, now I'm going to prove that this is a projected mesh by doing some terraforming to show you that indeed they are following the terrain. So I'm going to change this over to polygon, and I'm going to add a polygon, and I'm going to left control button and left mouse button, and I'm going to create a object right here, a polygon right here, and I'm going to right click, turn on properties, and I'm going to click on terraforming, and I only want my fall off to be 1 meter. Okay. Now I am going to sink the ground. Notice how that line is following the ground, and so is the apron, the pavement, okay? Because it's using the ground to drape that image on to my scenery. All right. So we put a big crater in this parking area, but those lines, since they're projected mesh, follow the ground. All right. So to close this video out, projected meshes, again, are just draped images onto your surface. You can use aerial photos. You can make your own textures and create your polygons. But a good idea is to take your airport image, aerial image, bring it into Blender, scale it, and then draw your lines and whatever features that you want as a projected mesh. Then when you bring it into the sim, they'll already be scaled and you can add them to your scenery. Okay? So I hope you get something out of this of what an introduction to projected meshes are. They're not complicated as the term projected meshes might seem. Just understand that it's just an image draped over the surface of the ground. Okay? So make sure that your objects that you create for projected meshes are scaled in Blender, and then you can add your aprons and all that kind of stuff into the sim. Okay? So I hope you guys understand what a projected mesh is. If you have any questions, comments, please leave them in the comments. I hope you subscribe, and if you feel inclined to support me, buymeacoffee.com/myphysicalworld. And you guys have a fantastic week, and I will see you on the next video.